and good afternoon to the task force once again. Appreciate your hard work at looking at what's been done. Obviously, put a lot into this, especially over the holiday week. A quick turnaround. I did want to share for those who are interested. Just a quick snapshot. Hopefully, everyone can see that. It's just the task force uh, minutes from the last meeting. Again, just looking for someone to approve those with a second, and then we can move on.
I'll make a move to approve.
Appreciate it. And
I'll second it.
if you see any alibis, feel free to email me or let me know, and I can correct those. All right, I'll stop sharing that, and then without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Guy.
Appreciate that. So just want to say thank you for the 4 folks who responded in depth to the report. We have a new version that we'll be emailing to you, but I want to go through a couple of things before we send them to you and have some questions for the folks that did submit their changes in that particular regard. Before I go there, my intent was to do a PowerPoint to be able to present to the city and the rest, but I find that a PowerPoint doesn't do justice to the report in itself. The executive summary, I believe that most of you have seen, is a worthwhile read. And I think the reading of the complete report is even more worthwhile. And I find that a PowerPoint doesn't do it justice. It might summarize things in a way that could be misconstrued. I would rather people make the effort to read the whole thing. And I want to make sure that everybody was on board with that. Curious of any reaction to the matter. If there are none, we will proceed. So I'll next PowerPoint and go from there. To the 4 folks who did respond, we have addressed a fair amount of the things that you have responded to, and it's going to be impossible to make everybody happy on some of those, but I'll go through some of the things that were brought up. One of the things that we did that was prevalent through some of our numbers, we added a minimum and a maximum in the numbers that we did bring up. What do I mean with that? In regards to the numbers of gallons that might be used, we said that the occupancy might be 60 to 180 a year. So to give more of a range in that particular regard, rather than giving a maximum value in that. And I think that's what's going to happen there. The other thing that we did, there was an issue with the definition of a bed and breakfast charters. And we basically refer to them in the same vein as the charter boats, meaning that to us, a bed and breakfast charter is somebody that takes somebody out on a vessel for an overnight or a luncheon or whatever on the bay or on the water is no different than the charter boats. And so that's really what we have focused on in that particular regard. There is another area that I think is probably the more sticky point to all of it. And it's in regard to maybe the holding small marinas at the same level as the large marina in regards to the barges. And so the general consensus that probably needs to be addressed by the city. We don't have a particular recommendation of it, but I'll come back to that at the end. We find that maybe the way the words have been crafted in current legislation is a bit one-sided, but we don't feel that we can make a recommendation to change everything right now because that would impact things substantially. And I'll come back to the general consensus at the end based on what I have seen everywhere. On that regard, and just paging through the other things that were brought up. The ordinance that we put it in as an addendum. There were comments made that maybe the ordinance was a bit premature it's really intended as a sample that might have to be worked with the city in that regard on that particular situation. And other than that, I'm just quickly browsing through the other changes that were made. You'll get a full copy of it, but I have a couple more questions at the end. This is the maximum and maximum. I'm not putting it up because I don't want the video yet to be going public that everybody can see it. I think once the task force is okay, we'll send it out to the rest of the public. However, we'll do two more things before that. I think the 50 slip limit is the difficult point that I just mentioned. See if there was any other comment that I wanted to address. No, that's about it on that particular end. Do Michael Thompson or Mike Batchelor, do you have any objection that we include your answers in a separate document that goes with the report as well? Because I think some of the points you're making are valid and they might not quite fit, but I think it's important that everybody is being heard in that regard.
I have no problem with it, Guy.
Okay.
I don't either. Thank you.
Okay. Because consensus is always difficult in all of those things. So I just want to make sure that people understand that that's what we're trying to do, but I want to be fair with everybody else on that. Let's see, we're about to send it to departments in the city. So there's about 8 or 9 people that we're going to ask the city to respond, if possible, within a week and no later than 2 weeks. And then we'll include their responses as well in the report, probably at the bottom of the report, so that people can see what the various departments think and want to do on this. And they will have read the report and then they can see where and how these things impact them as well. So that's still what's going to happen there. And then I wanted to report that we have received about 17 answers on the website for public input. And the overall census is a very negative sentiment, I would say, on the house barges, maybe 1 or 2 exceptions in some areas from residents at large. So I'll send you an email. I'm surprised there's not more responses, but I'll send an email around with the link to the website or where that is, so that if any of you want to propagate this, it's all welcome in a general sense, in a general regard. And that's really the last piece of input. Once we get the results back from the city, I feel that we probably should do a meeting that would finalize the report and let everybody take a look at it and see any other comments that anybody wants to add to it. And even if the task force is not 100% agreeable as a general, I think those comments should be included to fairness to all. I've been asked by Ross and Jacqueline to do a public hearing on this as well. And they will organize that. And they were shooting for the end of the month of July. I haven't heard back. I asked for a date, but to see if we can have a public hearing on this so the public can comment on it as well. And that's kind of what I have for now. Anybody else have any other concerns or comments they want to bring up in the things that we put in? Rick Nelson also made some comments about some issues with things that were in his area. Again, he kindly submitted a request through the website as well. We took some of his comments, and again, his other comments will be included in addition as well. That's what I have. Anybody else have any concerns or comments how we're proceeding from your end?
Let's see, Guy, this is Mike Thompson. I'm wondering, at one point or another, are we going to be doing a financial impact on the city and on any marina owners? And that's based on the responsibilities that are in the report, or we're going to wait till the end and look at the recommendations?
So to me, we should look at the recommendation and go from there once that is and see if we need to do something at the time. Given the timeline, the effort that takes, if anybody is willing to help in that, I'm open for it, but any other opinions on this?
So, Mike, how are you thinking of tackling that? I mean, I might certainly have an interest in that, might be willing to help out, but what were you thinking it might look like?
Well, I'm thinking that and a lot of some research needs to go into it, but we're talking about a lot of things in the report, and should if the committee recommends the going forward with house barges and that kind of thing, what impact is that going to have on city infrastructure? What impact will that have on the city budget for the various departments? And what impact will that have on the marinas? Because the marinas are going to have certain costs that they'll have to absorb if they're going to do this. So I think maybe we get an outline for the recommendations and then take that and look at what the financial implications are and what needs to happen in order for all this to come about. Now we can do this is what would happen if we have house barges in the marinas and if we don't have additional house barges, altering the ordinances and that sort of thing, as a comparison and contrast. But I do think that it would be prudent for the marina owners to know what they're getting into from a cost standpoint. And I think it'd be prudent for the city to know what we're getting into as far as an infrastructure. Do we need to add more street lights? Do we need to add more traffic lights? Do we need more police to patrol? Do we need more fire department folks? Do we need more people with the harbor master to enforce the stuff that's on the water? I mean, these are all things that could possibly happen, and I think it'd be worthwhile looking at.
Well,
This is Mary. Oh,
yeah, I was
Go
just, it seems to me that that presupposes that there's going to be a recommendation to approve house barges, which would then lead to then what are the costs of them. So if I might, the way I read the draft right now is that we haven't dealt with anything, the kind of the houseboat issue. We focus on the house barge issue, which is fine. And essentially are saying that the current legislation or regulations in terms of marinas that have more than 50 slips, for every 50 slips, they can have one house barge. And then to focus on then how that would be regulated or enforced. Is that where we are coming out right now?
That's sort of where I'm at. I'm not making any assumptions for recommendations or anything like that. I'm looking at what happens. It's a what if scenario.
I understand, Michael. And this is maybe more a question for Guy and Rod, in the respect that if there was going to be a recommendation from this group that there should be no house barges, then all that's a moot point. If it's well, there's more debate to go on for house barges, but this is the current city ordinance on it, and therefore this is how it should be enforced, then it's very limited really what now can be done with house barges. So I guess my question is, what is the draft is right now, Guy and Rod, what do you think it recommends in terms of what the city should be doing?
I'll take a stab at this, guys, and what I think it shows is to begin with, the the summary is sort of a collective response from all of the task members that chimed in. And what I think it showed was that there was no overwhelming evidence to push house barges in or expand the current regulations surrounding house barges. And what is existing in the current code deals with house barges, but it needs to be cleaned up so that the marina owners and potential barge owners understand what steps would have to be taken to get a permit to operate these house barges. Right now, it seems to be very much in conflict with each other, from planning and zoning to the harbor master to other areas. And so I think you're right. There's no recommendation to support expanding the current house barge regulation at this time. There was no support for that coming from any of our responses that we received. And so we tried to list the responses that we received in a way that was consistent with what the city was asking us, as far as in our from the initial request that we got. It's my opinion that with this recommendation, once we get consensus from our task force that we're in agreement with the document in its present form, and we come to some agreement in that regard, then Guy's intent is to send it to the city to ask for that response as far as what the impact will be to planning and zoning, what it would be to the fire department. I don't have any idea, but I need the fire department and planning and zoning, police, and the other municipalities to chime in so that we can get their response and feed that into this report. That's the next step. And the first thing we have to do is kind of come to some consensus that what we have put together in the way that Guy and I outlined it from the beginning is clearly documented here in the responses, and that was our intention moving forward.
So, so my point is, it seems to me, this is very informal. I talked to a number of marina owners, but that it seems like most people, as you said, they probably don't even want the house barges, right? And so so not that, so then what happens is people go, well, if we're not going to come up with a recommendation either for or against, then there's regulation on the book, which I don't quite know how we got to 50 slips and above, but I just assume it was, well, how can we limit this number as much as possible? And so I felt that that was arbitrary. And that's why I think that the city, either if it's to have house barges and people agree, that's fine. I'm not a fan of them, but if they're going to be there, I just thought that it should be readdressed in terms of what marinas, how they qualify. And again, it seemed we came up with this kind of arbitrary distinction in the past legislation. So I understand, Guy, it's not our job to rewrite that. But I guess I would like the recommendation is that if, it's a big if, but if house barges are to be allowed, then there should, the city should really look again, city council, at who's permitted to have them, and then those conditions that we've laid out in terms of enforcement. So,
if I may, I'll make two comments on what you said. It was clear that there is a tendency from most of what we've heard that they were not so inclined to add additional barges, and we're kind of taking the hands off. However, it is also very clear that there was frustrations in people either calling the city or inquiring about the process of how to get the permit, and or clarity on responses from the city. Is one big problem, is that there is no clarity on how you go about, if even you comply to the current regulation, how you go about it and who is in charge and who does all that. So that's number one. The second element in this is what you brought up with the 50 and the 2%. You know, if you bring it down to 30 or you bring it down to 20, all of a sudden then you open the door to 40 barges in the area. And so that's a decision that the city would have to make. We don't think that's up to us to do that. That would be really up to whoever is going to draft these things to see what it is. And if that decision is made, the understanding needs to be that's what you're going to get. I think our role was to say, okay, now we have a list of marinas. We know how many slips approximately are in all of the marinas. So if you wish to recraft that, this is what it would yield from your perspective. Now, is that the direction the city wants to go in? You heard what Rod said on the committee. I put together the list of the 17 answers I got from the public website, and it's overwhelmingly negative from either the people that were on there as well. I don't think it's my decision or our decision
No.
to do that. And so having said all that, I will stress in my outreach to the city that we want to know the financial impact of this as well from their department's perspective. So then that will also bring into the report the reality for the harbor master to deal with it, the planning and zoning, the other departments, fire and police, and there was a couple other ones as well. So then that will be another element that people can judge. Given what we've done with the amount of time and people that we had, I think they got a pretty good outlay. The harbor master has seen the report, and we got their responses. There was no anything major that we were asked to change in that particular regard. So I think we need to continue to get more input from the city, and then to address what Mike is saying, do we want to take as a group another look at those costs and what it would entail? Is it worth it if we're not going to have a recommendation to increase them in the city? The general consensus I get is no, but it's probably not clear. And the registration as it stands, I don't think it's clear or fair for that matter. And I think you're one of the ones that very clearly stipulated that in your comments. And I want those comments to be part of the report. And I think it's up to the city to say, yeah, that's probably not the way to do it. And then they need to decide how they wish to go about it. Remember, we're just a recommendation and they will do whatever they want to do.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and sorry to belabor the point, but
No, I don't think it is at all belaboring. I think these are why we have those
right.
meetings.
Let's say that if I don't know, let's say 18 house barges would qualify under the current regulation. My only point is then fine, 18 is the number, but then set conditions by which all marinas, if they can meet the conditions, then are allowed to apply for it, and not have this arbitrary assumption that, well, if you're have 50 slips or more, then you have the facilities and the capabilities of having a house barge. There's no real logic to that. I think it was done kind of working backwards, which was, well, we only want 15, maybe allow 15 house barges. That's as much as the city wants, which is fine. And then said, oh, well, how can we set a rule? Because it could have been a large marina was defined as 60 slips or 70 slips to come up with that number. So again, my request, and I don't think it's beyond the recommendation of this task force, is the city should decide how many house barge slips it wants to allow, and then set fair conditions for the marinas then to apply for it. But so I do think that can be within the scope of this report. It doesn't have to say that the number is correct, whether the number is 0 or 60. Fine, under the current regulations, if the number is 18 that qualify, fine, but then allow large and small marinas to be able to compete for those permits.
I think that's a very fair assessment, and we have some language to that regard, in one of the adjustments that we made, and you'll see it in that particular regard. So
Very good. Thank you.
If I can interrupt, it is Mr. Butler's had his hand up for a while. I just want to make sure we recognize that.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mr. Ellis.
this is Marcel. Yeah, I just had a quick, more question for the statement. I mean, there's been a lot of emphasis that has been put on house barges, and and the lack of emphasis put on houseboats, which are defined as two totally different things in my opinion. And but the way that this report is written, it lumps houseboats into house barges. So take away house barges, right? Which I think we're definitely moving in the right direction as far as what needs to be studied and all the information being passed out on house barges. But when I think about houseboats, it's still my concern as a task force member to understand, the city position on determining a private marina not having the ability to bring in a certain type of boat that they want to bring in, i.e. a aft cabin, a catamaran, a houseboat, as long as it's the navigable, Coast Guard approved. But the way that this report is written, it's yearly written towards house barges, but then on the other hand, it lumps houseboats into that same category. So my concern is how do we make sure that there's at this distinct delineation between the two, because they're totally two different things.
Mhm.
In my opinion.
No, totally fair. So I heard Rod one. I want to say a couple of things on that, Marcelo. So the definition that we try to take on the houseboat is they typically will come in and they will go out and navigate, meaning it is then part of the same vessel as I would say any other vessel in the marina, meaning
I'm sorry, you made a houseboat or house barge?
the houseboat. The house barge, I think
Okay.
we're clear on the definition
Right,
that
correct.
it's mostly meant as a sedentary, I'm going to say,
Correct.
and it's STR, short-term rental intent, and it's not really intent to move, with all due respect, right? I mean, I think we're okay on that.
Yeah, well,
definition.
okay, yeah, I'm
So,
fine.
so,
That makes
so I
sense.
think we did a reasonable job there. On the houseboat, I think what we tried to do there, I was on the Sassafras River in Georgetown there last week, and there was one of the houseboats there at one of the marinas in Georgetown. And it was almost like the picture that you see in the report where it moves, it has an engine, and it's capable of moving self-sustained within reasonable wind and wave condition, I'm going to say, and it moves by itself. And our approach, and Rod might have better words for it, our approach was they are no different than a catamaran. They're no different than any vessel that is a trawler or anything else. And we believe they should be classified as such, and therefore they don't really fall in what we focused in here. Now, if you want to make your point more clear in that and write us a statement on that, I think we should include it. Rod, you want to add something to that?
Well, I agree with exactly what you're saying. And Marcellus, we specifically tried to segment away houseboats and charter boats and bed and breakfast charters and everything else from the house barges, so that we really are focusing on the house barges. And I think we could strengthen that definition up. We've gone to the extent of trying to provide a definition for each boat, and we felt that was enough. But if you're looking at the report saying, I don't think it's a strong enough separation between houseboat and house barge, we can take a look at that. But clearly our intent was to separate houseboats from house barges. And if you say, hey, that wasn't clear to me, then I think our team would be happy to go back and look at that and see if we can tighten that up a little bit in our definition.
And maybe I've just I misread it, Rod, but I just looked at when it said that they were talking about the existing legislation that was written, they were saying that they didn't see any need for making any changes to the language. And if you read the language of the current legislation, it lumps houseboats in with house
Okay,
barges.
now you might have
That's
a
what-
point there. And
100%.
I think my reaction to that is there is a sort of very general language in the report that says we must look at the existing regulations surrounding house barges and make it clearer because it is in conflict and it's cloudy and nobody quite understands it. And that is a clear recommendation from this committee, and we haven't gone into that code and absolutely picked it apart and made recommendations on how to change the code, but we felt that was within the city's planning and zoning and otherwise to come up with those steps to achieve a permittable house barge. Because that's what we see on the books is there are steps to achieve a house barge at the marinas if you qualify. But it's very misleading, very unclear, and sometimes in conflict between planning and zoning and perhaps the harbor master and then the marina owner. So that needs to be cleared up is what we're saying in our document.
But
Well,
if I might, the public though, I think they consider them one and the same. When they come out against the house barges, it's probably because of the noise, the things such as that. And so while I think we're answering the question that was put before us, I think the public comments are going to be conflating those two.
Well, I don't know. That wasn't the case with the 17 responses we got from the general public. They were all surrounding house barges. And I thought in our report, if you read down past the summary, we went to great lengths to define the houseboats and specifically push them off to the side.
I agree.
Say that's not what we're discussing here. So I think in a review of the responses we got from the general public, which are outside of the institutional knowledge that this task force has, I don't recall one of them referring to it as a houseboat. It was all barges. Okay, that's how
good.
I saw it.
And then if I might, then maybe the permitting process for suggesting for barges, then those conditions could apply to the houseboats.
No, they don't need to be.
Yeah.
No, the houseboats are just like any other boat in the marina. They are designed by a naval architect. They're designed to go coastal cruising, navigate with their own steering system, engine package, and handle, reasonable weather and waves and stuff. And we tried to make that distinction between that and the house barge.
And I
which
think you did.
Construction techniques are very different. So,
I totally
and then
agree.
if we went through the report and to Guy's point earlier, there are pictures associated with that. And I think the imagery is very powerful. When people see a barge, they get immediately a picture in their mind. When they see a houseboat, they also know what they're talking about. But houseboats, we're trying to say that and to Marcellus's point, if houseboats are mentioned in the language relating to the code, then it needs to be stricken. And that's part of what is wrong with it is the confusion surrounding that. Because we felt houseboats don't apply to the same regulations as a house barge would be.
Very good.
Marcellus, does that address what you were bringing up, that the code needs to be clarified in regards to the house boats? That, in our view, what was in there was mostly for house barges. And if the term house boats were in there, that they need to clarify that. And in my view, as Rod said, stricken out of there. Is that part of what you were addressing?
Yeah, that's exactly, because I not to belabor this, but you get into the slippery slope of a municipality controlling what type of boat a marina owner can have in its marina. Whether it's a catamaran, it might be a houseboat this year or for the next 5 years. Then in 3 more years, it might become catamarans, and then it might become, trawlers, So I just want to make sure that we're being very careful on how we, are, presenting this to the city and the people who are looking at this, that we're not putting ourselves in a position where, they're identifying certain vessels, legal vessels, legal boats that tie up to any marina, just like any other boat, are excluded from marina owners being able to rent those slips to someone who might want to live on a so-called houseboat, as I put my fingers in quotation marks, but it's.
No, I totally get it. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, they are more prevalent in lake type environment. I'm thinking about the more south in Tennessee and in Georgia, and there's plenty of areas like Nevada has them a lot more. There are some up here on the upper Chesapeake. They're still around. I think they were more in Annapolis, but I think they've kind of diminished in our area in that particular regard. And I think they're absolutely under the guidance of Coast Guard and whatever else. I don't think the house barge will ever go into the Coast Guard regulations because they're not moving, whatever. And that's the distinction we were, and I think that's what you're going back to, is that part of the legislation on the city side needs to be stricken so that we stick to those things and not to the other stuff.
Yeah, I think so, because if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that was often talked about was Ocean City banning houseboats, and that seemed to be kind of conflating these issues with house barges, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
But Ocean City also banned liveaboards too, because if you read the legislation, it also banned liveaboards.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not saying we should emulate Ocean City. I'm just wondering where the confusion might have come from.
Mm-hmm.
This is my. I mean, I wanted to jump in and just kind of support that. I think the recommendation from the committee should be not whether or not to allow house barges. It's that the current legislation in place needs to be thoroughly reviewed and cleared up and cleaned up and made more more certain that there are qualifications that can be met by certain marinas, and that be left to be determined by the marina owner whether they allow them or not whether or not they're allowed by the city. I think that is, that's where marina owners and operators would advocate that, leaving it up to the marinas to determine whether or not they want to apply and allow for these, not whether they should be allowed at all, because there is current legislation that is unclear, and it may be preferential to larger marinas. And again, I think I concur with that number seems arbitrary. 50 marina slips or more. I think it should be evaluated. What that number should be, I don't know. I'm not going to make a recommendation. I think that should be further evaluated, and I think that's where this needs to kind of. And I agree with Marcellus that if it is unclear, it needs to be made more clear in the report that we're not discussing houseboats because those do not, just as liveaboards, are not in what we're recommending to the public or to the council. So I think that's my 2 cents on this, is that as we try and advocate for cleaning up the current legislation and not going a step back and saying that rewrite it completely, it's that it needs to be addressed in the future.
Yeah, I will take it on myself that I didn't release the changes over the last couple of days because, holiday and whatever else. But also, I wanted to have this conversation, which allows us to add what you just asked for and have more clarity in the report. So we'll do one more round, if that's okay with everyone. Before we send to the city, I'll talk to Rod and Mary, who've helped on this, and we'll make those adjustments. We'll send it to the city, including to all of you, if that's okay. And then don't hesitate to comment on that. And we'll try then to close this for now to see where we land and make sure it has. And then what my moral in this is to make sure that you feel, if you don't, for example, 100% agree with what the report says, I want to include your responses in it so other people can see, and the city, if they make the effort, they can see what your response on your viewpoints are, and they can make their decisions based on that. And I want to make sure that's fair for all involved. So
This is Mary.
Jacqueline.
Oh, sorry.
Jackie has her hand up. Can you hang on for a second? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Gig. I've been here the whole time. So I just wanted to say, once I see that come through from you to the city staff, then I can move it along through the city and remind people to respond. A lot of people are on vacation and such, so giving us 2 weeks is needed. Somebody might not be in 1 week, but the other. And then regarding a work session for the city council, that's what I'd suggested, that this be presented as part of a work session. So once we have the comments in, during August, then we can get the report in final form to council. And then they've asked that I schedule, you didn't hear back because I was trying to get this on the July schedule, but I was told we have too many work sessions. Works out anyway for getting comments back from staff. But so they've asked me to schedule a work session in September. So those are they're on Thursday afternoons from 3 to 5. So whoever's going to present, I just need, your availability on Thursdays in September at that time.
Would you be so kind to clarify the definition of a work session, of what that entails, and
Yeah.
if we need our tuxedo or not? And
So yeah, our work sessions are they're meetings that are open to the public, and for purposes of addressing something like this, where we have a contractor that that maybe helped us with our stormwater fee, and they want to make a special presentation that takes a little bit longer than usual, then we want to take up in a regular city council session where we're really considering legislation and things like that. So it's just when something's a little bit different, someone's done it. So it could be something from staff. It's often from outside groups, from task forces, from work groups, and contractors. So it's just a set aside time just for that topic. And then there's usually presentation and then Q&A from council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary?
That's okay. I think I can pass if we are winding down or moving to a next topic.
We're winding down because I think I have nothing else on my agenda. If anybody else has anything else they want to bring up, this is the time, Mary.
I have a question really unrelated to this, but just for my education. Office barges, I don't know to the extent that we have them in the city, but if marinas are using them and using them as offices, is that under a whole other area of code or the city, or is that just unaddressed?
I'll tell you what I know, and it's very little. There are exclusions in the current legislation for those, such as a fuel dock and things of that nature. We'd have to go back and look at 15.14, but I can point you to that.
Yeah, the barges for the purpose of offices are allowed for construction. When you're doing construction on the water and you're using it for that purpose, that's part of the exceptions.
Yeah, but it's not permanent. There's nothing, you can't put a permanent barge, like if you wanted to have an office at your marina. I don't think that's allowed by the city.
I don't know about that, Marcellus. I respectfully disagree, because there's one in existence at Annapolis Landing Marina. Their office for their entire marina is on the fuel dock, and it is a barge on a lift. So there has to be some permitting process, and it probably mirrors more onshore permitting, where it needs to be connected to power and sewer and water and everything else that more resembles onshore regulations than over the water. But we have examples of barges as permanent offices. So
Wow. Yeah, I was just told by the harbor master. I only got that information from the harbor master that wasn't allowed. The one downtown at the city dock, I think, by Waterman. Right. They had some type of special exception because it's been in existence for so long. But from what they told me when we were going through everything we were going through, that they are not allowed. So I'm just going on what they told me.
Yeah, I would have to dig in more to that because those conditions already exist at some
And-
marinas.
To add to that too, I have the code pulled up, and section F in the code says that the code restricting them does not apply to a barge designed and used for office storage or fueling purposes. So there is no restrictions on those purposes. I also, what I was going to say before, and since we are still talking about the barge definition, was that, in my opinion, I think that the current delineation between barge and a boat in the current law is quite clear in a way, in that it defines it as the primary purpose for self-propelled navigation, and it uses the word primary purpose, which is something to look at. I think on page 20 of our report, when we're tasked to review the current city laws, and that'll appear on page 20 for those that want to have their attention called to that. I was also going to say too, in terms of the economic impact to the marinas and to the marine industry, that's something we were tasked to do on page 6. So definitely review page 6 for those that are interested in specifically to the maritime industry and marinas. But then there's also throughout other economic impacts, such as the task towards the end of the report that asks us about the fees. And then, of course, on the last page, the point that has notes saying we are waiting for the city to get back on the impact to city staffing. So it's kind of throughout the report, I would say.
Yeah.
Just be my comment.
Well, this was quite entertaining and vivacious, which I appreciate everybody's feedback on that particular end. I think the openness has been fantastic from my point of view. I also want to thank the people who put enormous efforts, and I'll point out Mary in particular from a writings perspective, and all the input we got from everywhere. Nobody can do this alone, and I want to say thank you before anything else goes on in that particular regard. So give us a couple days. We'll send the stuff out once we review what we said in this meeting, if that's okay. If you think of something in your shower tomorrow morning, feel free to send an email. We'll try to address it as well. And that is all what I have. Anybody else has any other business or comments they want to bring up? Going once, going twice. Then can I have a motion to adjourn?
Seconded.
Second, third.
We appreciate and we wish you all a happy Tuesday and try to stay dry tonight.